Hey guys, my name is Nikki Renfro. I'm a recently retired state trooper, and I decided to start a podcast, Safe Nation Podcast. We're covering safety, security, and law enforcement. Hey everybody, and welcome to this episode of Safe Nation Podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Cedric Alexander. Dr. Alexander is the Community Safety Commissioner for the city of Minneapolis. Dr. Alexander, welcome to Safe Nation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I love being here. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I want to just kind of jump right in, but before I do that, I have read up on your background. You have an extensive background in policing, in public safety, all over. It's quite impressive. I know that when I read one of your books, you have a couple of books out there. This one is really good. It helped me to understand a lot more about you and about your experience level. But you have a book out there called The New Guardians. That was such a great read. Can you tell me a little bit about that book and your thoughts as you were writing that one?
Yeah, so The New Guardians actually came to mind following the death of Michael Brown back in 2014. In fact, at that time, I was public safety director in DeKalb County, and I was on Obama's task force for 21st century policing. So at the end of that work in 2015, I thought it would be advantageous on a number of different levels to write something about from my own experience over the years of policing in South Florida, in Miami, and other places, and being in DeKalb at that time. Would it be to talk a little bit about what does 21st century policing need to look like? And following here again the death of Michael Brown and the task force report, which was written under executive order during the presidency of Barack Obama, a lot of those principles came out of that document because essentially at the end of the day, when we're talking about the importance of policing in this country, and this has been 7 years ago now since that book was released, but the important part of all of this in this very moment in space that we're in right now, and I think is still relevant today, is building relationships in those communities which have been for so many years overlooked and underrepresented. And the book covers a little bit of my own history, which was not my suggestion, but was a suggestion of the editors of the book. But it really did get into, I think, not just nationally, but global, some of the global issues around the world of a community unrest that was going on. But it was just important to be able to say something about, to talk a little bit about, and write about in that particular book, the importance of building those relationships as we move into the 21st century, the importance of technology in modern day public safety. But nothing, Nikki, was more important than being able to emphasize and overemphasize the importance of building relationships in communities across this country. Because at the end of the day, even if we think about where we are today in 2022, still very young into this 21st century, one of the biggest challenges we all are having is what? Recruitment, right? Maintaining the numbers that we have of sworn officers and then trying to recruit new officers. That's the big challenge. It's a big challenge across the country. But two things are going to be essentially important if we're going to maintain some level of public safety in these communities. And one, yes, we have to recruit more, but the recruiting field is changing. Young people are not choosing to come into the profession as quickly. But I think it also is an opportunity for us to look at the young people we do recruit. We got to be more creative in our recruitment, but the young people we do recruit have to understand the importance of embracing diversity. But I think that for us, as we continue to move into the 21st century, yes, building those relationships is going to be essentially important with the shortages that we have. But also, how do we complement and how do we supplant many of these shortages also with technology? Because that's going to play a huge essential part as well in our crime fighting efforts in the 21st century. And the book kind of leans to both of those ideals.
You know, you mentioned 21st century policing, and when that document came out, it became a study guide. It became a guide for police executives. It gave something sort of as a go-by to look at those tenets and say, okay, let me examine my agency here. Let me see what we're doing, and will any of this work? So talk a little bit about your time on the on the president's 21st century policing task force.
Can you still hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay.
And I think the audio the video may have gone out on your end. Are you? Okay.
Yeah, that may be.
I think when you made a little adjustment, it kind of went out.
Yeah. But let me say this. So in terms of the task force report itself, I was notified by Chuck Ramsey, retired Chief Chuck Ramsey of Philadelphia, who called me and asked me if I would be interested in being part of the task force. And I indicated to him I would find it a delight to be able to serve my country, and in that respect. And but 11-person task force was put together. We were charged by President Obama at that time to create a document that would provide a textbook, a workbook, if you will, a GPS system, a go-to, as you kind of indicated there, Nikki, as to how to build relationships across the country in policing. And that's what that document did. We had 6 pillars in there. The first one beginning with building trust and legitimacy, pillar 1, and then pillar 6. The other bookend was around officer wellness. How do we help take care of our officers who work in this very stressful space? And then there were 4 other areas of concern that were in there. Technology being one of them, working with the media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that was probably one of the most rewarding careers in my life, to have been asked to be part of that, to create a workbook, or if you would, a document that could kind of help us, guide us through this very challenging time we were in then and we're in now. And I think the book paid great dividends to the country as a whole during the Obama administration. And of course, when you had a change of presidents, it kind of slipped to the back of the books to read. But there were many departments across this country, Nikki, that still utilize that document then and to this day, that serves as a guide to them around how to approach policing in the 21st century. There was nothing in there that was overly profound. Some of this stuff we already know, but there were also some areas in there that were new. Transparency was born out of that term, born out of that 21st century document. Body cameras was born out of that document and the work that did at that time. Procedural justice, that whole philosophy was born out of that document at that time. So the influence and impact that that document has had on American policing in this country for the last 7 years has really been unique. And it is paid benefit and is still being utilized today. But I tell you, nothing was here again more rewarding being on that task force. And even more so, I never will forget on March 2nd in 2015, all 11 of us were summoned to the White House to review that document because we had to have it on his desk by May 2nd of 2015. And we all went up there, me, Chuck Ramsey, Ron Davis, Sean Smoot, and a whole host of us, along with other staff that was assigned to us from the White House for support. Went there, and President Obama came in the room, and Nikki, he spent about 2 hours with us going over that document. But what was most profoundly interesting in that interaction with him is that he had actually read the document. And we could tell that he had read the document because he was asking questions, and that made it very clear to us. He had some working knowledge, some working knowledge, some understanding of the document. And that was quite impressive coming from an American president, because we never thought that we would sit there with him for 2 hours. He don't spend that time with worldwide leaders. And but having an opportunity to sit there with him, go through that document, and was something that will always be memorable.
Well, we appreciate the work that you and others put into it, because it did leave somewhat of arguably a holy grail, if you will, that many look to try to just get some answers and make it better. Do you think that it's really relevant today? Is it a timeless document, or could it stand a revamp?
Well, everything changes over time. I think there's still some good things in that document. When you start talking about you take the first pillar, building trust and legitimacy, for an example. There's information that's in there that's going to always hold true. In the importance of building those relationships and how we exemplify ourselves, how we carry ourselves. Issue around procedural justice. If you and I are supervisors, Nikki, how we treat our officers inside our departments is going to be how they're going to treat people out on the street. So I think there's still a lot of relevance today. But of course, we have moved into a much deeper time around trust, particularly since the post the death of George Floyd here in Minneapolis. And I think we've learned some new things in which we can employ, some new ideas. So yes, we should never see it as a document that's the end all, the be all. And I think there's always going to be opportunities in which we can explore to dig deeper and do better, because as time changes, things change. We have to be able to change as well. But a significant portion of that document is still very relevant today. And if you think about officer wellness, the importance of making sure that our officers have peer counseling groups, have access to mental health care, and have the ability to be able to go and talk to professionals if they need be, because the nature of the job in and of itself can be overwhelmingly stressful over a sustained period of time. So I think bringing those kinds of things to the consciousness is important. Back during that time, they're still very relevant today, but there are probably some new things that we can incorporate today as well as it relates to advancing policing. One we know is chokeholds, getting rid of chokeholds. One we know is mental health, being able to do more with our communities that are struggling with mental health and homelessness. There was a little emphasis on that back in 2015, but we know today that it is much more of a critical issue now than it ever has been before. So.
Okay. Before I move on to the final few questions in our discussion, can you see if there's a way for you to get your video back? I'm not sure if it clicked off on the video on your end.
I think I may. Can I go out and come back in?
Can you do that?
Oh, here it is. Here it is.
Okay. There we go.
That's
okay.
why I got a genius assistant.
Listen, you always got to have the right people around you. I'm telling you. Okay, cool. Okay, great. All right, so we'll just jump right back in. So finishing up that about the 21st century police, and I agree. I think there are lots and lots of elements within that. That's a good study guide, study material. It's a way to look back at what happened just a few years ago when you guys did that, and then now what we're seeing now is something. We can now fast forward to your new position and your new role there with the city of Minneapolis. I understand that's a new role that was developed. Is that correct? They've never had a commissioner of safety?
Right. In DeKalb County, we're called a public safety director. Here in Minneapolis, it's referred to commissioner. It all depends on what part of the country you're in. So primarily, your police chief, fire chief, 911 director, Office of Violence Prevention, and Office of Emergency Management, all those directors and chiefs report up to me. And primarily my responsibility every day now, Nikki, is to make sure that all 5 of those public safety platforms are talking to each other. We meet regularly, weekly. We share information. We provide support to each other. And each one of them don't have to operate in an individual silo, if you will. They all have their areas of responsibility, but at the same time, to be able to communicate, share information, create new ideas, only enhances public safety for the community in which we serve. And here in Minneapolis, this city is still healing from May 25th of 2020, the day of the death of George Floyd. And so there are a lot of unique challenges here as it relates to that. And there are challenges here that are similar to the rest of the country as well. We're down 250 police officers. And we nowhere have the number that we should have for a community, for a metropolitan city this size, because it's a beautiful city. It's a corporate 500 city. You have more corporate headquarters here in Minneapolis than any other city outside of New York City. And that's huge. When you think about, you got Best Buy headquarters here, US Bank is headquarters here, Target is headquarters here. Just a number of major corporations. Pillsbury is headquarters here, and dozens of others. So they have a huge footprint in the downtown community. Many of those companies have a huge footprint in the downtown of this community. And we've had challenges downtown post George Floyd, post COVID. But we're going to continue with the efforts that we're employing to try to make some difference as it relates to the emerging crime efforts that we're fighting, like in most metropolitan cities. But equally as important, building those relationships in communities are a huge part of what we do.
You mentioned just how productive the city is and how beautiful it is. And yet that cloud sort of still hangs over when you mention George Floyd, when you mention the Minneapolis Police Department. I can't imagine if I were a member of that police department that how much I would want to maybe separate myself from that stigma that came with it. Would you say that the George Floyd incident is a reason for such an exodus or the loss of officers, or no?
Yeah, but not because of the stigma itself. The loss had a lot to do with the riots and and a lot of politics around it at that time. But it had nothing to do with the stigma so much of the department. I think, you know, what they're experiencing here, I experienced 40 years ago in Miami, Nikki, back in the 80s when we had a similar incident. And we had a major riot in Miami. A lot of officers left the department, and a handful stayed behind. But we fought our way through it. And it was painful because people didn't trust you. They didn't like you. They didn't trust you. And to build that trust came back over time. And we were able to build those numbers back up. But that was a very different time in terms of trying to recover 200 officers now. The way we could have, recovered 1,000 back then, it's totally different. Because you put out a call now for police officers, everybody's not running, to get to you. But that has nothing to do with this being Minneapolis as much as it has to do with the trend across the country of young people who are choosing to do other things.
So are there any new policy changes that you're looking at right now? Policy changes in training?
Yeah, the chief of police here has, the acting chief, she has enacted some new policy changes prior to me coming here because George Floyd was, 2.5 years, only been here 3 months, but you had 2.5 years post George Floyd. And so they made a number of changes in terms of the type of traffic stops that they make, in terms of neck restraints, like most departments across the country. They made changes around how they train, the courses that are trained, and the emphasis being put on it. You cannot do this outside military training that some officers had been going to. That's not considered acceptable anymore. So that, the brakes have been put on a number of things that I think that over time will influence and enhance policing. But here's the thing about policy, Nikki. We can have written policies, but we got to make those policies come alive, right? We have to activate them. We got to take them off the paper and really put them into play. And policy in and of itself does not change culture unless we make them actionable. And that's the goal here. It's not just to have these policies on paper, but actually make them come alive. And it's something that we live by, and it's something that we guide and govern ourselves by.
Excellent. Well, I want to ask you about your latest book, unless you slipped another one in that I didn't know about. But this one, in defense of public service, how 22 million government workers will save our republic. And in that book, you mentioned the 3 branches of government. We all remember it from school, right? Legislative, executive, and judicial. But you're suggesting that there is a 4th branch. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, in theory, I'm suggesting that there is. And that 4th branch, quite frankly, are the 22 million people across this country that are public servants, whether they're in city government, state government, federal government, whether they're police officers, firefighters, they're the men and women who, take the snow off our streets in the winter if you live up north, or support staff, or whatever the case may happen to be, and our military included, because these are the folks who get it done for us every day. Elected officials come and go, but those people who serve as public servants, who are in public office, they're the ones who keep the lights on every day. So the book was really dedicated to those 22 million Americans who I refer to as the fourth branch of government, because regardless of what their political affiliation may be in their personal lives, when they go to work every day, their job is just to do what? To make sure that the people in which they serve are getting the very best service, whether it's there in the city of Atlanta, whether it's in the state of Georgia, or it's the federal government in Washington, D.C. So that book was dedicated to them. It talked about the history and the emergence of over time, going back to the beginning of this country, how this government was set up, and the importance of being able to have public servants who can work independently of political affiliation in terms of the work and the jobs that they do. And the book came out in March of 2020 with a great deal of excitement. But what else happened in March of 2020? We got hit with, right? And so the book never did have a chance to really take off, because so much was going on and changing in the country at that point. But the book is still out there on Amazon. And but that's all the books I've written to this point. And there may be a third one in me, Nikki, but not today. But it probably will be.
Well, you've certainly given us enough to study up on and to learn from. So we'll hang on to these couple of books for a while. Well, I appreciate your time today. I know you're a busy man out there running things in Minneapolis. So we wish you all the best. And I appreciate you.
Thank you, Nikki. And thank you to you and your audience there in and around Metro Atlanta and throughout Georgia and throughout the country who may be hearing this. And it has been wonderful to be here with you today. And thank you for your service, and thank you for your leadership still in the community. Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right, we'll see you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Today, our guest was Dr. Cedric Alexander. I wanted to interview him because he was recently, as of a few months ago, named the Commissioner of Safety for the city of Minneapolis. We know that Minneapolis is the place where the incident occurred, the death of George Floyd, and it was one of Minneapolis's police officers, Derek Chauvin, who's since been convicted of that murder. That's the place where he worked. And so for them to bring in someone to be the commissioner of safety is sort of like a commissioner of public safety, if you will. So he has oversight over the first responders, over the police department, fire, 911, EMS, and so forth. And I wanted to bring him in just to see what he would be bringing to Minneapolis in the aftermath of such a tragic incident that took place. So the document that we're referring to is the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And that document was so critical, especially around 2015, I believe it was. And this was during the wake of the Michael Brown officer involved incident. And all of these deaths were starting to occur. And the public was really in an uproar. We thought we saw a lot then, but who would have ever thought that to fast forward into 2020 to see what we saw happen worldwide and just the toll that it would take on law enforcement and on citizens as well. We're talking about riots popping up all over the world, really. We never thought that it would it would turn and things would turn to be that way. And it was just one thing after another, sort of a buildup of emotion. And then you had COVID happening all at the same time. That didn't make it any better. The uncertainties there. So this document that he's referring to, when I ask him, is it still relevant today? That's a good question, because if you go back and flip through it, sure, there's still a lot that needs to be done. And there was a lot that was accomplished already. The work that that task force did is admirable work. But now, moving forward, perhaps we need to look at it and revamp again.